Okay, good morning to everyone. Welcome to this technical workshop on coastal wetland governance, more precisely on the self-assessment and planning tool that we were exercising actually in the month before, and we are going to present the result of this testing. But let me, of course, welcome you on behalf of two organizers. First of all, RAC, from where I come, the center, the Regional Activity Center of the Mediterranean Action Plan that are based in Split. And you would remember that we are the main center for the implementation of the integrated coastal zone management in the Mediterranean, implementing the protocol on ICZM, where coastal wetlands have an important role. Also, I'd like to welcome on behalf of MedWet. You are probably much more familiar with MedWet. They are the organization assisting the countries in the Mediterranean to implement the Ramsar Convention on wetlands. And we have colleagues here with us, Flavio, Sana, up there. So welcome and good morning to all of you. This project is co-financed by the MAVA Foundation. It is actually the second phase of this project that we have started quite some time ago, for even maybe 5 years, when we have produced a good governance handbook that you will familiarized with through the webinars. And but the objective today is to exchange actually experience that you coastal managers have gained through the application of this self-assessment and planning tool. We somehow expected more results, but what we have analyzed the answers. We have with us also our expert, Mr. Brian Shipman, who has assisted us in developing, first of all, the governance handbook on one side, but now also has assisted us in analyzing the results of this testing. It is important for MAVA, which unfortunately is phasing now, that we disseminate this knowledge that we have gained through this work in the last years, and to share experience and to see how we can progress and use these tools that are available online in the future. So I would like to thank all of you who have responded to this self-assessment and planning tool and provided the results. And I would also definitely already invite you to use the tool also in the future. So if you let me, I could introduce the agenda very quickly. You could see from the invitation that the workshop is not a long one. We have rather focused really on the results of this exercise. And we'll have also a sort of voting exercise, sort of test for all of us on how we understand the governance issue for the coastal wetlands. This will be the second part. So we will start with in the first part with the presentation of the analysis of the results related to this self-assessment and planning tool that you have used and that we have received your contributions. And the presentation will be done with from our expert by Brian Shipman, and we hope to get some feedback, from the managers to see how did you find the tool? Was it useful? Was it easy to use, and so on? Then we'll have a short break, and we will prepare for this group session when we will, first introduce three. We thought very important questions related to coastal wetland governance. Also, Brian will help us assist us with this, introducing the possible answers. What are the possible options for the answer? So you will have a variety of answers that you will then be able to vote. So our colleagues from MedWet have prepared this online voting system, and we will see the results of our votes. And yeah, we will comment the results, and at the end, we are hoping to have the final conclusion by 12:30, when we are going to close the workshop. So I'm looking forward for this short technical workshop. I'm really inviting you to be active, to ask whatever question you may have along the presentations, and feel free to raise hand and so on. As Flavio already mentioned before, we have interpretation by our colleagues Selena and Christina, English, French. So in the bottom you can see the interpretation. You can choose the language you prefer. And I think this is all. The session is recorded, so we can use the results of this workshop later on. So thank you very much once again. Welcome to this workshop. And I think we can now start. And I think the first moderator is Flavio, and he will take over the first session together with Brian. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you, Flavio. Before you start, can we, because we are a small group, so can we know each other and have a round table and introduce each other just before you start, Flavio? Sorry.
Yeah, yes, for sure. It was exactly what I was preparing to say. So before starting with Brian, so please, if you would like to quickly switch on your camera and just say goodbye, hello, your name, where you came from, which Ramsar site you belong to. So in order to make the workshop much more interactive and just for the ice breaking before starting with Brian. So we can start from Daria, for example.
Okay, well, I'll start first, as you asked me. Can you all see me, by the
Brian,
way? Yeah. You can see me. Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah. My name's Brian Shipman. I think some of you will know me already. I've been working with PAPRAC for some time now, and I was asked to help develop the governance handbook and the self-assessment tool. So basically it's my fault. So there are problems. But as I say, I'm a consultant. I'm based in the UK, in the extreme southwest in Cornwall on the Atlantic coast. So a very different environment to those which most of you are working in at the moment, and probably a very different climate. Thank you.
Okay, the next one, Daria.
Okay, I am a PAPRAC program officer, not from the Ramsar site, but I'm a big fan of Mr. Brian's work. So I like this handbook very much, which you have prepared, and I wanted to see how the testing of the results went with the cases. And I can say that the governance is really important topic, and I'm working a lot in the climate, let's say, a climate action field, and everybody is so interested about the governance. This is the most difficult part, and so I would say this is also the last of the SDGs 17, so the key ones. So I hope I will learn something today from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daria. And Paula? We cannot hear you. Please switch on your mic.
Hello, I'm working in Rio Formosa, and our director is responsible also for Castro Marim Natural Reserve, which is Ramsar also.
Okay, thank you.
Algarve, yeah, Portugal.
Yes.
I'm in
Maya.
Portugal.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
I am Maya from Nature Park Vransko Jezero in Croatia. It is also an ornithological reserve and Ramsar site, of course. And that's it for now. Thank you for this meeting.
Okay, you're welcome. And the next one is Abba. It's reported on.
Bonjour.
The group singer.
Vous m'entendez? Bonjour. Moi, je suis Ramzi Abba, c'est le directeur du centre synergétique. Je suis gestionnaire de la réserve naturelle du lac de Regaya, zone humide classée Ramsar en 2003. Voilà.
En Algérie.
En Algérie, exactement. Voilà.
Bienvenue.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Abdesattar. Please switch on your microphone, otherwise we cannot hear you.
ساعة بتستر الميكرو سكر. ما نسمعش فيك. C'est bon.
Okay, yeah.
Bonjour.
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 Abstar Bouja, directeur régional des forêts de Bizerte, Tunisie. Je suis le gestionnaire du parc national de Shkol, le site Ramsar, également ville Ramsar Gharmel. J'espère bien qu'on va améliorer surtout tout ce qui est en planification de gouvernance au niveau des sites Ramsar face au changement climatique, aux problèmes hydrauliques. Et merci pour tout le monde.
Merci, bienvenue.
Merci à vous, bienvenue. Monsieur Gebran.
Oui, bonjour, bonjour tout le monde.
Bonjour.
Ravi d'être avec vous aujourd'hui pour ce thème qui est très important, qui va parler de la gouvernance. Effectivement, moi, Mohamed Gebran, ingénieur des géoforêts, chef de service partenariat conservation des ressources naturelles à Tétouan au Maroc et point focal de la zone de Jbel Moussa et le lac de Smir, qui sont deux zones humides au Maroc qui sont classées site Ramsar. Et on est effectivement très, très intéressé par cette thématique de gouvernance, puisque on est en plein changement aussi au niveau de notre institution, qui est devenue maintenant une agence nationale des eaux et forêts, et dans lesquels, parmi ces axes stratégiques, c'est effectivement la gouvernance inclusive et l'approche participative. Voilà. Merci.
Bienvenue.
Parfait. Bienvenue, merci beaucoup, Laurent. Et Anaïsa.
Pardon.
Monsieur.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anaísa. I work in Portugal in the natural reserve of Sant André and Sancha Lagoons. And I'm representing another person, João Carlos Farinha. I don't know if he's already here, but thank you for this meeting.
Welcome.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Who is the next? Emir Jeta.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emirieta Adame.
I well pronounced the name, sorry.
Emirieta
Emirieta,
Adame.
okay, perfect.
Thank you. I'm coming from Institute for Nature Conservation in Albania. I'm a freshwater officer, and I have implemented a project that was exactly for the governance of the protected areas, especially wetlands, from 4 protected areas, and 2 of them are Ramsar sites. Thank you for accepting me in this meeting.
Thank you, welcome. Next one, Genti.
Morning, everyone. I'm Genti Cromida from Inca as well, working with Emirieta on these projects. As Emirieta said, we have supported this particular administration in implementing these tools on assessing governance on these wetlands along the Adriatic coast.
Welcome.
Welcome, perfect. So I think the last one, Lily Fatma.
Madame Kili. Madame Fatma, le micro est éteint.
Okay, maybe. Okay, just we can progress in any case. So, well, thank you again for being here, above all for continuing to follow this path that has seen many of you involved since the beginning, as Marco mentioned before. So as a moderator of this session, now we can start with our Brian presentation of about 20 minutes, focusing on the analysis of the main results obtained from your experience applying the self-assessment and planning tool. As you probably remember, last year we asked you, together with your working group, your working team, to apply this self-assessment planning tool to your sites. So many of you have responded and provided the results. It was very interesting for us to read your answers and know your path and efforts that you put locally. So now Brian will present you a summary of these results with a perspective on a Mediterranean scale. And then following this presentation, there will be time to receive comments, feedback, and discuss more with you about it and to comment on this part. In particular, we will be curious if the process can be improved or if something is missing, and how was your experience. So Brian, I think you can start. The floor is yours, so you can start sharing your presentation.
Thank you, Flavio.
You're welcome.
So I'll just go to share screen. All right. Can everyone see my screen now?
Yes.
Is it clear?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, just before I start, can I just thank everyone for their support, both during the process of preparing the handbook and the self-assessment tool, but also in those that responded so well to the requests to test it. So thank you very much indeed for that. Just a reminder, the work is based on the governance handbook, which I think came out in 2020 now, which seems a long time ago, during the middle of the pandemic. So what I want to do is very briefly introduce the main theme of the handbook, and secondly go on to look at what the test and the challenge I gave to those, or we gave to those wetlands, to try and test the self-assessment tool, and then go on to look at the results. So firstly, just as a reminder that the key theme of this document and the handbook and the whole exercise is that governance is about making decisions. It's about who has the power, authority, and responsibility to make decisions. It's about how those decisions are taken, the mechanisms for taking decisions, and how effective and efficient decisions are. And finally, and very importantly, how accountable, whether to their community or to the policymakers, the politicians, etc., are the decision makers. So it's all about decision makings. And one thing that there is often a confusion about governance and management. I should stress that governance is not management, but they are very closely interrelated. Governance is the overall governing umbrella process that drives management, and in turn, the management then informs back to governance. So it should be, in an ideal world, a circular process. But I think for me, and this is really something that's been a problem throughout my entire career, is that governance is about the long term. It's not about a 2-year, 5-year project. It's about building relationships in the long term. It's about building community support. And finally, it's all about delivering action. So it's something that should be seen as a long-term process, not something that is just something funded by a project. In developing the handbook, we use lessons from 4 sites, and I won't go over those in detail, but there was Oristano in Gulf in Sardinia, Garalmela in Tunisia, the Bunabayana in Albania, and Prespa Lakes, which, although it isn't coastal, had a great deal of experience and lessons to provide for us in developing the handbook through their long experience, particularly in dealing with transboundary issues. So those are the 4 wetlands that we used as test beds, if you like, to develop the handbook. And in terms of what we found was, amongst other things, this is not the only thing, but one of the key things that we found was that there are 3 generic models that you can apply probably across the world, but particularly in the Mediterranean, that on the 3 extremes, on the left-hand side of the diagram there, you have the state-directed model, whereby the governance process is directed from above. It's a top-down approach. Someone in the capital has come up with a model, and someone is appointed from the government, all these kind of things, to drive that governance process at the local level. In between is something that we called shorthand the contract approach, which is some kind of contractual agreement between the different levels of government and the community, whether that's national, regional, and local, between different agencies, between different stakeholders, to come up with a contractual approach to governance. And often, in the case of the Mediterranean, based on the French model, which is a formal contract, a written contract. And finally, over on the right-hand side, the very bottom-up approach, which is based on a community-developed approach, literally from the bottom up, which is driven locally and resourced locally. And that's less common, but is a very interesting model. So these are the extremes, and most of the wetlands across the Mediterranean will fit somewhere into one of those models. We were looking for a universal roadmap, but you can imagine for a region as diverse and complex, politically, culturally, geographically, physically, there isn't a one-size-fits-all template. But we did come up what we think is a universally applicable roadmap to apply to wetlands that basically allows the user to report progress, and with that to build a shared vision and to plan a way forward. And a roadmap that allows the user to test and review both the existing government arrangements or the design of new ones. So it's a way of testing the government's arrangements. And finally, something that actually does, we hope, apply to all wetlands, either those with a long history of governance or those on newly designated sites. And we came across the Mediterranean, the whole spectrum of wetlands, some with governance going back many decades, and some that are only recently designated with only very modern, very recent governance structures. So that's what we ended up with, the handbook, and it basically puts a lot of emphasis on preparing your governance structures, laying the basic foundations we see as key to developing solid governance in the future. We really do stress that shows you how to map what the existing arrangements are, who your stakeholders are, what your powers and resources are, and then gives you a tool to plan the way forward. And finally, something that really looks at something we called excellence in governance. So it isn't just a mechanical process, it's something that delivers something of quality, and I'll come back to that later, and something that is a shared vision between all the stakeholders in the community. So that's the circular process that the handbook tries to set out. And along with that, you'll all be familiar with the self-assessment tool, which we developed, which is based on the Excel software, which accompanies the handbook and is based on it. So back in 2021, we invited 20 wetlands to apply the self-assessment and planning tool. On the right, you can see the rapid assessment grid, which is both based on a simple just tick box exercise, and the vitality scorecard, which you were invited to give a numerical response to your answers. And the objectives of the exercise, for us, it was to understand how effective governance is, to identify where the main gaps and shortcomings in any governance system is, and finally, to help the user to list the priority actions for improvement. So those three things, those are the core of the whole exercise. How effective is the governance? And how effective could it become? What are the main gaps at the moment? What issues, what areas of action, activity are the site managers missing? And finally, out of all the actions that are required, what are the priorities amongst them? So that's what the questions are intended to produce. Also, respondents were asked to submit a report, with some background about the wetland, its current status, its history, whether or not a management plan exists, and what the current governance structure is. Who did the assessment? Who filled in these forms? When was it done and how was it done? Was it done by an individual site manager, or was a group convened to carry out the exercise? We also asked a report on the results of the rapid assessment and vitality scorecard. So I'll come back to that later in my description. And what the results of the planning exercise were, the action plan. What were the preconditions required to implement the plan of action, the barriers to progress, and the actions and the priorities. And finally, the conclusions. What were the main results, the next step, and very importantly, what were the opinions on the tool? How useful is it? What areas for improvement? In all, 7 wetlands responded. I'll quickly list those. The Côte de Bacayas in Morocco, Regaya in Algeria, Oristano, I mentioned earlier, in Sardinia, the Trapani and Pacheco, did I pronounce that correctly? I hope, Flavio, in Sicily, Djerba in Tunisia, the Buna in Albania, and Tyre in Lebanon. So those were the 7 wetlands that responded. I should stress at this moment that we've given a guarantee of confidentiality in terms of individual responses. So I won't discuss the individual responses from sites without the permission of those sites. And so we've anonymized or agglomerated into generalized comments and conclusions. And that's quite an important in presenting results. So just in summary, respondents were asked to self-assess their progress in governance. They were asked to assess the vitality of governance activities. Thirdly, they were asked to complete the detailed planning grids. And fourthly, to provide that report on the future planning. So going through these in detail, applying the rapid assessment grid, that was the first part of the Excel tool. They were asked, respondents and those users of the self-assessment tool are asked to self-assess progress under 4 categories. Firstly is the framework, and these are the preconditions for governance. So for each of these, respondents are asked to look at what is the existing framework, how well established is the existing governance structure within the area. So do you have a constitution for your governance body? Have you identified core funding? Do the local community understand and support the goals of the site designation? So in other words, how mature is your current institution? Secondly, that what we call the strategy section, which looks at behavioral changes. So have you assessed the baseline conditions for the site? Have you identified where likely scenarios are likely to take you? Have you carried out scientific research on selected management questions? Have you got a set of objectives, management objectives? So it's moving from the basic foundations to looking at how well prepared are you for the future? And moving on to looking at the change agenda, looking at the results and potential benefits. So have you got a management plan endorsed? Do you have those funding for future action plan? Do you have regular monitoring? Are you implementing pilot actions? So basically this can be summarized as, is something happening on the ground? And do you have the resources to deliver it? And finally, this is the ultimate objective of all management and governance, is that achieving that common vision. So you move from a situation in which you're always trying to push change, always trying to drive people forward, to one in which it becomes self-sustaining, so that you do have long-term funding in place. You are documenting progress and the attainment of goals, and you've made the investment in the necessary physical infrastructure. This is the ideal. This is the ultimate objective of all management, really, is to have this self-sustaining process. So, and you can see in these boxes, these are the questions we asked. And in completing the tool, we used a very simple traffic light score. For each of those many questions we asked, is work initiated or any activity? If there's no activity at all with regard to that activity, if you don't have funding in place, for example, then it's red. If it's underway, if you're measuring, you're mapping your stakeholders, or you're carrying out scientific research on key issues, then it's the yellow or amber score. And finally, if it's completed, it's green. So those are the actions that are fully completed. So a simple, although the questions are very complex, we hope there was a very simple way of responding to them and scoring them. So the analysis. As I say, I won't go into individual scores because with a low sample size of 7, but also it wouldn't be right to identify individual sites. But this was the overall pattern in terms of those traffic light scores. And 2/3 almost of all those activities are underway or partially completed. So with only 21% completed, which is not entirely surprising, with something like 1 in 5, 22%, where there is no activity. So it's very difficult to summarize what that means across the board, but I think really it just emphasized that governance is a process. Governance is always a work in progress. So it wasn't entirely surprising that the highest score went to activities that are underway or just partially completed. And some conclusions from that inevitably the governance environment is dynamic, is never fixed. And it's not surprising really, because as well as constantly changing personnel, constantly changing resources, you're also dealing with a constantly changing legislation, whether that's at national or in relevant countries at EU level or at international level. And if that wasn't enough, then you have constant changes in your national government and political structures, which I'm sure all of you will be familiar with, where one government comes in, is very enthusiastic about the environment, replaced by another that really doesn't have any interest at all, or you have to educate from new. And secondly, the governance process is iterative, which basically means we go round in a circle with no clear beginning and end point. You never actually complete the governance cycle. And finally, one of the most frustrating conclusions, and this came out from all the respondents, I think, was that the inconsistency of funding, which really is the most destabilizing element of the governance process. Sadly, although I mentioned it at the beginning, inevitably, a lot of the activity is driven by project funding, which in itself is a very short-term resource. So very frustrating, but almost inevitable that good governance needs to find some way of overcoming this roller coaster of funding inconsistency. One thing we did find is that variations reflect the age of the designated wetland. I don't mean the age of the wetland itself, but how old is the designation? Some wetlands have been designated, as I said, for many decades. Others are only just in the last few years. So there are variations in the progress in governance. So in countries with a long established and stable system of nature protection systems and with stable political structures, they tended to show higher scores for work underway or actually completed. But in contrast, those wetlands in countries with a relatively short history of nature protection and political stability are likely to show a higher level of uninitiated or zero for the listed actions. And I think, again, that maturity issue also reflects the stability of funding for the governance structures in those wetlands. The second part of the self-assessment that respondents were asked to complete is this, what we call the vitality scoreboard. And this was developed really in response to a challenge that was set out by the IUCN a few years ago, which rightly stated that governance is more than just a bureaucratic box-ticking exercise. It's got to be more than that. You've got to bring it alive. You've got to make it something that people both want to do as well as they have to do it. So how do you do this? And nobody really, as the IUCN admit, no one really has really managed to find an answer to this question, how you measure that vitality. So we think we've come up with something that is probably the first serious attempt to do that. And what we asked respondents to do is to look at various aspects of governance, the governance structure, whether it's a committee or a steering group, the management staff of the site, the key stakeholders, any partner institutions, and the management plan itself, and really just assess those different components of the governance structure according to different criteria. For example, how empowered is the steering group? Does it have independence of decision making? Is it creative? Does it actually contribute effectively to the management of the site? How wise are those various sectors? How wise are the management staff? Do they just come in at 8 o'clock in the morning and go home at 4 o'clock without any real engagement, any real feedback into the site, constructive feedback? Are they really creative? Do they actually help develop the site itself? How adaptive are they? How flexible are the various components to change? How creative are they? How innovative? And finally, how representative of the wider community, of the diversity of that community, the ethnic mix, cultural mix, even the religious mix. So all these questions, and we asked respondents to give a simple score between 1 and 4, and that again automatically totaled up into a simple traffic light system. If a low score of 0 to 32 meant more work was needed, in the medium 33 to 63 we were heading in the right direction, and if you got above 64, then really well done, keep up the good work. This of course is a very subjective assessment, And I certainly wouldn't go into detail on what the individual sites responded, but I can say is that scores were somewhere between 44 and 77. So there is a very wide breadth of response and scoring, but it would be wrong of me to make any judgments on that, because this part of the exercise is primarily designed to promote discussion and self-reflection. It's not for an outside body to judge how good or bad that result is. So it's a very subjective process designed for self-reflection and to promote discussion on the site itself. Finally, the tool includes several pages. What this looks like a very daunting task to complete these planning grids. These are the grids that allow you to plan for the future of your site. So just as there's one example here from the many, under institutional design, for example, let's look at this one: governance structure designed and established, what indicators of progress there are in that, the governance structure, in this case, regular meetings of a governance committee and delivery of a management plan. There's an indicator. What barriers to the progress of that governance structure? Well, in this case, no long-term secure funding and poor political commitment. And thirdly, and most importantly for the governance structure, what are the actions and next steps? So in this case, prepare and agree a program of work. Secondly, brief politicians and prepare briefing materials for them. And finally, what priority is that work in the overall priorities of the management site, and it's a simple score of 1 to 3. So having completed this exercise for all the activities, then the obvious next step is just to identify the simple first priority, second and third priorities for work. And so that was completed, but only 6 of the 7 sites managed to complete those planning grids for the sites. And sadly, only 4 out of the 7 sites actually provided that report, the detailed report that we asked for in terms of what the planning framework was. So comments and observations, these were the feedback from the sites on the use of the tool. And this is my last point for this presentation. There's a degree of repetitiveness in the questions, and they could be merged and simplified. And I think that's a good point. And I think that I think if we were doing it, a second round would then merge and simplify some of the questions. There is a problem of quantifying indicator. This is always a problem. And again, that's something we can look at. How do you quantify indicators of progress in some of these areas, which are often subjective or matters of opinion? There were some technical difficulties in the use of the grids, and I think this relates back to the use of the Excel tool rather than something that was purpose designed or a web-based application. There was a reason at the beginning that we used Excel because of the nature of the tool, in that it contains a lot of information that the managers of the site may feel is rather sensitive. It was felt that it was better to have a downloadable tool over which the users have full control, rather than something that is web-based. Maybe now there is space for developing that web-based application. In another project I'm working on with PAPRAC relating to marine spatial planning, we've used a web-based application, which I think overcomes perhaps the issues about confidentiality, but is actually, I think, a lot easier to use than Excel, which is not admittedly everybody's favorite piece of Microsoft software. It can be rather daunting. We tried to make it easy to use, but it is limited by Excel itself. And finally, there was an opinion that there was good value in the tool in helping set priority objectives and a hierarchy of those priority actions according to an agreed timetable. So that was the feedback from the exercise, and I'll finish on that point because I think one of the most useful things for this morning is to get feedback from those who completed the exercise, but also those that may want to use it. So I'll finish at that point. And if I can then stop the share. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian, for this very interesting detailed talk, which finally gave us an overview of the team, but also about the results obtained from participants. I would like just to recall that the results presented by Brian are linked to a previous phase in 2021 to 2021, during which we shared this information with some of you to get the results about the self-assessment planning tool. So for those that will not participate, don't worry, it's just a summary of the results that we got. I would also like to ask, as Brian already mentioned, what were the main difficulties in applying the tool, applied to your local situation, and how you manage to overcome these kind of difficulties, or how you adapt the tool to your specific situation. If you can tell us also about particular situation, and especially if it was also useful to work in a group team with your team on these issues. So now there is a room for open question and discussion. So actually feel free to intervene and share your ideas and experience. Both Brian and Marco will be there for supporting. And if you are not confident about speaking, you can also list your questions, ideas, and feelings on the chat, and we will try to answer. So don't be shy. And I think, Brian, we can start with a comment that we had during your talk on the chat from Mr. Abdesatar, which wrote, I don't know if you can read directly in the chat, but no. he mentioned that sometimes to speak about governance of wetlands, a general form sometimes does not apply to specific local cases, which is actually what you presented at the beginning and what was the aim of the self-assessment planning tool. I don't know if you would like to add something about that. You're welcome to answer to Mr. Abdesatar.
Sorry, I'm just looking at the question here. Could you just translate that for me, please? Sorry, my French is not good.
Yeah, exactly. He's asking, is just commenting about the fact that a general form to complete above governance or wetland governance sometimes cannot be correctly applied to local cases.
Yeah.
This is what exactly the main topic of the self-assessment and planning tool. But if you would like to add something and how we tried to overcome this intrinsic limitation, I would say.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, but this is something, as Flavio said, this is our biggest challenge, was to look at how you can apply universal messages across the whole of the Mediterranean region. And this is something also that the IUCN found a challenge, not just looking at wetlands, but all protected sites around the globe. You know, what are the universal messages that apply? And I won't go into the detail in the handbook, but there are universal messages which do apply whether your site, whatever the characteristics of your site. And that's what I think the handbook has tried to identify in terms of how inclusive, for example, your governance is in terms of the local community, how inclusive culturally. And I think it's worth setting aside perhaps your preconceptions and looking with an open mind at what's said in the handbook, because we do refer to issues like, for example, how representative the governance structure is, how representative, for for example, in terms of culture, in terms of gender, all those issues. So these are universal messages, but ultimately it's the responsibility of the local governance structure to choose whether or not to do it. But what we're saying in the handbook is that these are universal messages, but they will also help improve the quality of governance and ultimately the quality of governance of your individual site. We wouldn't claim that it's absolutely perfectly applicable to every site, but we think we've covered the main core issues. And that's a very generalized response, but that was really the purpose of the handbook, was to look at those universally applicable messages.
Thank you, Brian. I was just also reflecting about the fact that you mentioned, you showed how the history of a country or certain countries could affect, could influence the level of governance for such protected sites. And that some of the participants and managers responded with a zero level of implementation of some of the target activities that you listed in the self-assessment and planning tool. So I would like to know, in your opinion, how is it possible to overcome these limits? Is just a matter of time associated to the history and to the governance level of a country, or can some movements from the bottom rise in order to implement the situation quicker than the normal country life of a country? Sorry.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating dynamic when you look at the governance structure of a site. And I was particularly struck by a pilot site in Tunisia, which was the classic example of a very new political structure in the country that even created a law of subsidiarity, so that the political objective, which is in my mind almost unique, that said the activity must be driven at the lowest possible political level. So it was actually from the community, and I was really privileged to attend the meeting of the local steering group, which was at a plastic picnic table outside of a cafe. But there was a real energy about it. And I think that's the key thing. It's about an energy, because one thing I could go to many mature sites, both in the Mediterranean or here in the UK, who've been going for years, decades, and there's no energy in the meetings. People turn up because it's in their diary, not because they want to. Whereas at the meeting I went to in Tunisia, everybody wanted to speak. Everybody wanted to say something. It was really exciting to be part of that process. But the interesting players in that, and it was the NGO that had almost been acting in the absence of a local structure for many years. And I think they were finding it quite difficult to wonder what their role would be, because they'd been in charge for many years. They'd been the key drivers. And I think normally you'd say that an international NGO would be a very important player, but maybe sometimes they're the only player in the book and their role is absolutely vital. But sometimes there needs to be a balance between the role of the international NGOs, particularly in the less developed countries in the world, and the local subsidiarity. There has to be that balance achieved. But really the key thing is the energy that people come to the table with, and it's supporting that drive and enthusiasm to get it right. And so it isn't as simple, oh yes, because we've been doing it for a long time. I mean, that's a message that always comes from here in the UK. We've been doing this for 100 years, so of course we know better than you. But, I know the reality. I spent my career going to meetings where people just don't really want to be there. But they have to be there because their boss tells them to go. I'd rather go to a meeting where people really are keen to get action on the ground. And it's the other example perhaps is Oristano in Sardinia. Again, a real enthusiasm there developed through that contract approach. But I could go to other examples as well. But for me, it's about that energy, and that's where we developed the vitality scorecard. I think that was to try and somehow encapsulate that enthusiasm, if you like, to get the job done. So I'm not sure if that answers your original question, Flavio, but that's my reaction.
Thank you very much, Brian. Sorry, Mr. Abdesattar, I noted only now that you have the hand raised up. So, yes, please.
Merci, madame. Merci. Je vous remercie pour cette présentation claire et très riche. Juste si vous permettez un petit éclaircissement, je crois que chaque zone humide a son propre plan de gestion et d'aménagement. Et bien sûr que oui, il y a une relation entre gouvernance et gestion. Certains y sont liés. Même on peut dire que la gouvernance, elle oriente ou bien elle dirige la gestion. Vous avez parlé d'une feuille de route universelle pour tester et réviser la gouvernance. Je crois qu'on n'arrive pas à appliquer cette feuille de route pour tous les zones humides. Je dis bien, chaque zone humide a son propre plan de gestion. Donc, on ne peut pas parler d'une feuille de route universelle. Si vous permettez plus d'éclaircissement. Et merci. Vous m'entendez, bien sûr. C'est bon?
Oui, oui, c'est bon, merci.
Merci.
I think Brian is just waiting for the translation. Did you?
Yeah, I got that. Yeah. I don't. Yeah, I agree. I don't think we say there is a simple template that applies to everyone. Really, these are just things to. This is a checklist because you may think you have all the answers, but maybe you haven't looked at everything. It's really a challenge back to you as the site managers to see if you really have included everything. That is your management, for example, is it fully inclusive? That's all we're asking. Have you covered the essentials? And are the things within our checklist that would help you improve the quality of your management plan? Because the management plan is not an end in itself. The management plan is a means to an end, as we say in English. It's a means of achieving the basic objectives and goals of the site. So what we're doing with the handbook is really trying to provide you with a range of tools that may help you do that. And as well, in the handbook, we give you a lot of practical advice in terms of the tips and tricks section at the end. So I think it would be wrong for any site manager, and I've been a site manager for many years, it would be wrong to assume that we always have the right answers. It's always good to look at other models and to be challenged on our assumptions.
Thank you, Brian. Oh, there's another hand raised up. Emir Jetta.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. And I want first to give our, let's say, experience with the project that we are implementing in our 4 sites. We choose them to be not only coastal wetland area, but also inside inland. And for this project, we, let's say, apply the self-assessment for Shkodra Lake, for Prespa area, for Divjaka, and for Narta. From these 2 are coastal, Divjaka and Narta lagoons areas. For inland, Shkodra Lake and Prespa. This was just to see how we can, let's say, apply such kind of self-assessment and road mapping, and especially to think about governance, not only management. But during the completing this grid, the first thing that we faced is that even there are all protected areas according to the Albanian legislation and IUCN categories defining, there are not defined as wetland areas. This is, let's say, the gap for the first assessment that we need to mention in this assessment. Because in these areas, even there are management plans established from National Agency of Protected Areas. Even there are long-term management plans that are implemented in these areas. Means they are older than 10 years, so needs to revise and to update this management plan. But also it is necessary to add issues which are linked with wetland management, because in these management plans are not detected any issue which are linked with wetlands direct. This is not only, let's say, the gap of the from the preparing of the management plans for these areas, but it is coming from firstly from the legislation in Albania. The framework of nature protection or wetlands are have the gaps, as the strategy of protection biodiversity in Albania has not any, let's say, attention to give this direction for wetlands management. And this gap in legislation is reflected even in management plans. This is the first. The second one is that we managed to do this self-assessment only with administration of the management of these protected areas, which means we not sit down together with other actors or, let's say, stakeholders who use the nature resources of these wetlands or have impact in these areas. So this assessment, I feel it is not completed correctly. So it is just in point of management, administration of this area, but not in governance. As we collected, let's say, answers from these managers of these areas, they were focused on human resources, on the management issues, on funding, fundraising for management, but not correctly in the communication with other stakeholders, not in, let's say, what mentioned Brian, in the contract with other stakeholders to manage this area as wetland, as a nature resource. So this is the main gap on this self-assessment. We made 3 steps from 4 that Brian mentioned in his presentation, which means the self-assessment, the vitality, and the third one to see what barriers and gaps are. And now we are preparing the final report, and we decided to present this report in a management committee where it is, let's say, the highest unit or committee which take into consideration not only the management, but even the communication between different stakeholders for management of these areas. And we will see how they will be ready to take this exercise for the next time in next year, just to be prepared that this is a tool to first assess how all these stakeholders are ready to collaborate and to cooperate between them, and also to see how can overcome the gaps and the barriers to complete not only the management plan existed for these areas, but also link this management plan with wetland management issues. This is, let's say, the step that we want to follow up of this exercise. And we don't know how many, or let's say, how we can succeed in this process. Firstly, we feel that other stakeholders just seeing this area not as a protected area with some tasks for them or some responsibilities to be part of the management bodies, but as a nature where they can develop some activities like tourism, agriculture, and everything which is connected to this area, but not correctly and not connectly with management plan and the sustainable development inside of these areas. This is, let's say, in general, overall, that we have already identified during the exercises in these 4 wetland areas. And I want to mention that from this assessment, we are between partially completed to completed, because the management is taking care for everything as it is written in the grid, but not have big support, or let's say not enough support in human resources, in funds, and also in cooperation between. But I want just Brian to ask something about the grid. When we make the analysis for barriers and gaps, it was difficult to add rows in the Excel files when we have much more than the rows are defined in this Excel. How could we manage to add or to analyze more indicators or gaps or, let's say, barriers? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah, as I said, we did have problems with the use of Excel. I think we were quite strict about the use of password protecting the format of the grids, and in that case, it would be useful for us to release the formatting password so that you could add more lines in. I think that's the problem you're referring to there. Am I right? Is that you really need to be able to work with the Excel tool to add more lines in. It's just that we were worried because if you give me an Excel spreadsheet that someone else has prepared, I can almost guarantee that I will screw up the formatting because I'm not so good at Excel. So I think perhaps the solution there is for us to release the formatting part of that so that you can add in more lines. I think that's the problem there you're referring to. I think we were just trying to get people to focus on what the key barriers were. But if you need to add more, then I'm sure we can alter the formatting or enable you to change the format.
Okay, thank you. I will send to you this Excel format and we can discuss further on this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, no problem. And I think one of the issues is that you're trying to apply the tool to quite a very large area and a number of sites. So you are probably pushing it more than anyone else has, I think, in that for its use. And I'd be very interested to see what your experience is. And I'm not entirely surprised that finance and resources is the key issue that's identified by your managers. It seems to be it is the universal problem. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Mr. Ramsey.
Bonjour. Je vous remercie, Brian, pour votre intervention. Elle a été très bénéfique. J'ai quelques remarques. Enfin, je me présente toujours. Je suis le gestionnaire de la zone humide du lac de Régaya, Algérie. Je pense qu'on a répondu à l'auto-évaluation. Tout à l'heure, vous avez dit, est-ce que le gestionnaire du site vous autorise à identifier ou à répondre un petit peu par rapport à notre auto-évaluation. Moi, je vous permets d'utiliser nos réponses. Ce que je peux dire, c'est que d'une façon générale, l'auto-évaluation, elle est assez complète. Pourquoi? Je pense que tout dépend de l'âge de gestion du site. Dans quel sens? Si les gestionnaires ont une expérience, nous, par rapport à notre expérience, on a démarré réellement la gestion en 2003 à ce jour. ça nous a permis de savoir où on se positionne par rapport à notre gestion. C'est-à-dire l'auto-évaluation, ça nous a permis de s'auto-évaluer par rapport à tout ce qu'on a fait. Est-ce qu'on était dans le bon chemin ou on n'était pas dans le bon sens, je veux dire. Ça nous a permis de savoir qu'on était, ça veut dire ce qu'on faisait était correct. Pourquoi? Pour notre site, on est au stade le plus important, c'est par rapport à la gestion. Là, on est sur la protection du site en aire protégée au niveau national. Comme elle était classée Ramsar, là, on est au niveau du classement national. Pour cela, il y a des comités des commissions qui évaluent les études et les plans de gestion pour évaluer l'opportunité de classement de ce site en aire protégée. Ce que je veux aussi dire que pour l'outil d'évaluation, est-ce qu'il y a moyen de trouver des cases où un nouveau gestionnaire peut se positionner? Je pense que pour ceux qui ont parce que la gestion, c'est de l'expérience. On ne peut pas apprendre par un outil ou un livre, mais c'est ce qu'on a vécu sur le terrain. C'est ce que nous donne cette expérience. Parce qu'il y a beaucoup par exemple, par rapport au comité de gouvernance, comité de gestion et de pilotage. Ce que je propose aussi, déjà, pour qu'on puisse installer ces comités au niveau national, c'est déjà compliqué parce que c'est un travail intersectoriel. Il faut convaincre pour qu'on puisse mettre en place ces comités. Aussi, est-ce qu'il y a moyen de mettre, je pense que c'est l'objectif, d'avoir un comité de pilotage méditerranéen et un comité de gestion méditerranéen. Pourquoi? Un jeune gestionnaire, lorsqu'il y a un souci de gestion au niveau de son site ou dans son pays, il peut faire appel à ces comités de pilotage, à ces comités de gestion méditerranéens qui peuvent l'orienter, qui peuvent lui donner des orientations à un temps T. Pourquoi? Parce que parfois, on est obligé de répondre à des questions, à des problèmes très rapidement. On puisse accéder directement à des réponses par des experts, par des gestionnaires d'expérience pour qu'ils puissent aider les nouveaux ou les jeunes gestionnaires pour qu'ils puissent se retrouver, qu'ils puissent s'orienter. Effectivement, pour tout dire, c'est un peu compliqué, c'est tellement vaste qu'on ne peut pas tout dire sur ce sujet. Aussi, par rapport au plan de gestion, l'outil nous permet effectivement de mettre en place un plan de gestion. Mais je pense, effectivement, pour mettre un plan de gestion, il faut faire appel à des bureaux d'études, à des experts au niveau national. C'est compliqué, c'est coûteux. Mais l'outil de gestion, l'outil de gouvernance peut permettre à un gestionnaire d'avoir un plan de gestion, un plan opérationnel, rien qu'en se basant sur l'outil d'évaluation. Parce qu'il répond, pour moi, il répond de façon générale, globale, sur toutes les problématiques que un gestionnaire peut retrouver sur le terrain. Voilà, globalement, ce que je veux dire. Sinon, je ne vais pas m'arrêter. Merci.
Merci, Monsieur Ramzi. Très intéressant. Je partage votre idée, surtout que l'expérience sur le terrain, ça compte beaucoup dans le processus de gestion et de gouvernance des sites, mais même votre idée d'un comité de pilotage au niveau méditerranéen, c'est très intéressant à discuter comme support à les gestionnaires au niveau local pour avoir des décisions, un échange des idées de manière très vite, je dirais, sur des problématiques qui après peut-être sont communes pour différents pays et différents gestionnaires. Je laisse Brian répondre à la suite de votre commentaire et question.
Thank you, Abba. It's always good to hear from Regaya. I think we've had a lot of experience from you working through ICZM over many years, I think, with your area. So it's good to hear that you had a good experience with the tool. I think I wouldn't underestimate the political potential of the tool itself. By just the action of completing the tool is a political action, or can be a political action if you involve those political bodies in that process, because they are then being given an objective list of the challenge that is faced by the wetland. So I was interested to summarize what you're saying, if I've got this correct, is that it is part of a political process of how you can engage the national structures in the process of wetland governance. And it allows you to identify that potential gap or weakness from the support from that level. So I think it is important to realize that potentially it can be used at that political level. I think there's always opportunities for more shared experience in the Mediterranean. And I think the Mediterranean, from an outsider's perspective, which I have, is actually one of the most developed regions in terms of cooperation. You often underestimate yourselves in the degree of activity that takes place. Certainly in the field I've been most experience of ICZM, there's an enormous amount of cooperation that it doesn't apply in other regional seas. So I wouldn't underestimate that, but I think it's up to bodies like MedWet to develop those regional structures. So, but I'd be very interested to see what further you can do. There is one thing I always find a problem is that there's often a little bit too much emphasis on the highly designated sites, and that probably the Ramsar sites, there's probably more cooperation purely because they have that Ramsar designation. So it would be good, I think, to open up to other not so highly designated sites. Sorry, Flavio, I'm sure you're in a better position to answer that question.
Yes, I think so. I think, Mr. Rodier, I don't know if you have any other to add. Oh, en français. Je ne sais pas si vous avez d'autres commentaires à faire ou si c'est bien. Et je ne sais pas si quelqu'un d'autre veut prendre la parole, veut commenter ou il y a des questions à faire. Je ne sais pas si les autres sites aussi qui ont participé à ces exercices. Sinon, je dirais qu'on est dans le temps, on a actuellement les coffee break. So we will come back in 10 minutes, but please stay with us because in the second part of the workshop, there will be an interactive part during which we can try to answer to three simple questions with a web tool developed by our technician, Alexandre. So we will together just see the questions and the answers. We will comment a little bit about it before, and then we will start the voting for a few minutes and just will check the final results. It's a way to make the workshop much more interactive, and so I'm sure it will be a pleasure for us to see the results in real time. So if everybody agrees, we can just meet in 10 minutes after the short coffee break, okay? So stay connected and just switch on the camera and see you in a few minutes.
Yeah, so let's continue with the second session, if you are all well and fine with a short break. Yeah, so the second session is going to be a very practical one, I think very engaging, and I think you will like it because it is going to be a very sort of summary of what Brian has been presenting, especially related to the handbook, and then these responses from some coastal wetlands. You will see that it is worth participating, being engaged, and and first of all listening to Brian, who is going to introduce the three questions And each question will have possibility of 3 answers, and we will go one by one. I think first Brian will introduce the first question. No, I think the tool would allow us to go after we have heard and understand all the questions and answers, and then we will have the voting. Sorry for this. Yeah, otherwise it's going to be a confusion maybe. Yeah. So let's do it like this. I would like to ask, Brian, first Flavio to share the first question on the screen, because we put.
Can you see my PowerPoint actually?
Yeah, but let's go down to the text.
Oh, yeah.
We put the question in French and English so that you both, we see both languages at the same time, and much easier for our interpreters. And also when the text is visible, it's easier to understand. Depends on what kind of person you are, but yeah, that's how we say it. And this is the first question. Brian, please, can you introduce it?
Yeah, okay, thank you, Marco. This question really is about the process of governance, and it really relates to who drives that process, who's behind it, who pushes it forward. And to summarize that text, governance is about being inclusive, bringing everybody around the table. In the old days, it was quite easy. It was mostly seen as a technical exercise for technical people, but not in today's modern society. You need to bring many interests together from different sectors of society to achieve some sort of common vision. But it just doesn't happen by itself. You do need someone to drive that governance process. And really, based on your experience, because most of you in this meeting are very experienced site managers, the question is, in short, who is the best place to initiate and manage that process, manage the governance process? So who is the best placed to initiate the governance process and then to manage the process as it goes forward? That's the question.
Yeah, show the answers, please.
So we put the 3 answers there. I'm not. Hopefully you'll see that they're quite a comprehensive range. Firstly, is it the job of the management staff from the wetland to drive it forward? Or perhaps an external agency, for example, the national or the regional government, or somebody from an international fora, or perhaps a local or international NGO? That's the second answer. And thirdly, and this is based on some experience I've had right across Europe, is there a role for an independent champion, as we call it, from the local community maybe, or from the stakeholders, someone who's respected by all partners, someone who can generate new ideas and innovation. But most importantly, a figure who is widely respected, who has a strong voice within the local political structure. So 3 potential answers there. And I should emphasize, we're not saying there is a right answer to this. This is more a poll than a test. Is it the management staff of the wetland, an external agency, or thirdly, an independent champion, a single individual who perhaps is the right place within the local political and social structure to provide that guidance and leadership to drive the governance process forward? So that's question 1.
Yeah. Flavio, yes.
Right. Secondly, the second question relates to skills and responsibility. And bringing together local communities and mediating between many different society interests they are not skills that you normally associate with the manager's natural sites, but they are really fundamental to good governance. So the question here to summarize it, is what are the key skills and resources necessary to achieve good governance? And as a subpart of that question, what are the barriers to achieving them? So what are the key skills and resources needed to achieve good governance? And what are the barriers to achieving them?
Answers?
And the proposed answers to that, again, not necessarily a right answer, but these are the answers we're proposing. Does good governance lie in good communication skills, particularly with regard to inclusivity, the ability to reach out to groups and sectors in the community, and the resources that are needed to go along with that in terms of both time and money? So the answer one, good communication skills and inclusivity. Secondly, transparency and integrity. And the key word in this is trust. And in my experience and my opinion, trust is fundamental. As you all know, local stakeholders will be suspicious of what you guys managing the wetlands want to achieve. They have long established uses and access to the site, or a view or a particular view of the site. And turning that on its head, you as managers of the site may be suspicious of the motives of the local stakeholders. So it's about building that trust, and that requires transparency and integrity. And thirdly and finally, creativity. How creative are you? It's a much undervalued skill. How good are you at making complex technical issues accessible to a non-technical audience? And through that, to encourage participation, particularly by those groups that perhaps not so articulate, not so highly educated groups, not so privileged groups that have been traditionally excluded from the governance of the site. And so that you bring them to share your scenarios and your visions for the future, and they in turn help you develop your vision. So the three skills and responsibilities we're highlighting there: number one, communication skills and inclusivity; number two, transparency and integrity; and three, creativity.
Yeah.
So question three, legitimacy and transparency. What we've strongly advocate in the governance handbook is that governance, so long as it's consistent with your national and international obligation, it should take place at the closest feasible level to the community and within structures that have a democratic legitimacy and transparency. So whilst you're there, obviously, to meet your international and national obligations, you do need to have a local structure, local democratic structure that has legitimacy and transparency. So the question here, put simply, is what legal, political, or administrative structure best facilitates such governance, facilitate governance that has legitimacy and transparency?
Yeah.
And the answers to that, really, three again. Is it a structure that's established by state directive? Something that's come from your national state, that's a standard format, that's driven by national legislation and really delivered to your site rather than delivered by your site? That's the first answer. Secondly, is it a local initiative, a governance body that's perhaps developed under the auspices of a local or regional administration, or maybe a group of administrations, and the remit of that governance body developed under properly delegated authority from the centre and through voluntary cooperation? So a truly local initiative that's been given that power by the centre. And finally, the example that we mentioned before, the contract approach. And this is very much, sorry, Marco?
No, Flavio, the third question answer.
Oh, sorry, then. Yeah. Thank you, Marco. Flavio. The contract approach. Now, this is the model that's based on the a French originally developed model, the contract model, which is a contractual program of action for the wetland based on a process of constant consultation of local actors with a shared commitment, which is formalized in some form of contract document. So those are the three answers we're proposing under this final question of legitimacy and transparency. Firstly, established by state directive. Secondly, a bottom-up local initiative. Or thirdly, some form of contract approach based on the what I call the French model of a formal contract between the various stakeholders. So those are the three questions, and I'm happy to go through them again, or anyone.
Thank you very much, Brian, for explaining, rather in detail, the question and the answers. So we have, clear possibilities. Of course, as you said, there can be combination, but as we say, this is an exercise for all of us to, to get involved a little bit more dynamically into this workshop. As we have it online. If it was in person, this would be organized a bit different. But I would like to thank the colleagues from MedWet that have translated all these questions and answers to the tool that is available on the internet, and Alexander in particular. And now we will go through question by question. And after each question, Alexander will show us the results, and we'll see what is our opinion as a group at this workshop. So I think we can start. So Alexander, please go on with the first question.
Yes, but
yes,
Marco,
just one. Exactly. Just one another. Yeah, we will have only 2 minutes to think about the questions to answer. So you'll have to click what you think of would be the best answer for the question. And we do not have a lot of time. So if you want to be included, you need to, decide within 2 minutes. Is there something else, Flavio?
Yes, just sorry to interrupt. Yeah, just to inform that Alexander will share a link on the chat to join the pool. So you will find the link in the chat. Please click on it, enter, tap your name, and then when you are all ready, we can start with a voting session.
Mm-hmm.
Is it clear for everyone? If not, please let us know, and we will wait for everyone.
Yes.
Alexander, please let us know when all will be there and when you will start with a voting poll. So we are 22 people. I think 14 people will participate. I don't know if we have to participate as well.
Yes, please.
Yes,
so yes, why not?
Everyone, why not? Okay.
Everyone.
So I will put my name as well. Everyone has registered on the link.
I have 11 people right now.
How many? Sorry.
Okay, we need 22.
Okay, so
can you all register?
In the chat, in the Zoom, you have the link. You just click and then you write your name.
Voilà.
Well,
Pour ceux qui n'ont pas pu se connecter, il y a un lien qui a été partagé par notre collaborateur, Monsieur Alexandre Durand. Donc, c'est un lien Kahoot sur lequel on peut se connecter, mettre nos noms pour participer au quiz collectif. OK. Paola, est-ce que tu as Alexandre, Paola, Martine?
Yes, I got 13 people right now.
OK. OK, combien de personnes tu as pour le moment?
13.
13. OK. Pour ceux qui n'arrivent pas à se connecter, vous pouvez peut-être lever la main et on peut vous aider sur le process.
Okay, thank you, Alexander. Now we can see who is already
Yes, you can see now.
Oui.
registered.
Monsieur
14.
Abdesattar, il est là. Monsieur Ramzi. Non, Ramzi. Qui n'arrive pas à se connecter.
Abba from Algeria, Mr. Ramzi.
Non, j'arrive
probably.
pas à me connecter. J'arrive pas à trouver le nom.
Est-ce que vous avez ouvert le lien qui a été partagé? Je vais le repartager, le lien. Je vais le repartager maintenant sur le chat. Est-ce que vous arrivez à vous connecter sur ce lien?
Ok, normalement c'est bon.
Il suffit de cliquer là-dessus et ensuite vous allez avoir un petit cadre dans lequel vous pouvez introduire votre nom.
La boîte mail ou le nom?
Non, juste le nom, le petit nom, Ramzi.
Ok.
Yeah, we are not going to see the individual results. We'll just see the, the total. Huh? Not by names. It's, don't be afraid that, somebody
anonymous.
will analyze the, what, each of us has voted for.
Voilà, c'est juste un sondage, disons, d'opinion. Savoir vos opinions. D'accord.
Did you succeed, Mr. Ramzi?
Okay, 16.
Yeah, we are 16.
Qui n'arrive pas à se connecter, il peut lever la main dans la discussion et on peut l'aider, l'assister. Question.
No, you don't.
No, it's not for a question. it's just to participate to this quiz game.
Just need to get into this program that will allow us, then doing this exercise with the questions, and we will just click on the answers we think is the most relevant for the question.
So who is not able to connect on the quiz game?
Yeah, probably Alexander is not in. So
yeah, Alexander and the two translators, I think.
Yes, exactly.
They
so
will
it's
not be
3
there.
less. So we are not.
Okay, I see, Emerita, your name is already here, so I think it's fine. It's resolved. Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah, we are 14 now. Do you think?
Yes,
14?
we lose people.
We lose people. Yeah. This is not good.
Please stay on the quiz, please.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe we should start, Flavio.
Yes, I think so. What do you think, Marco?
Yes, let's go.
Let's
Otherwise,
start.
we will lose. We will lose.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, Alexander, I think you can start.
Okay, let's go.
Do you all see the question?
Yes.
And the answer?
So we have 111 seconds.
Can we have some dramatic music, Marco, please?
Dramatic music.
The Diocletian is coming to say Ave to the people, waiting at him.
You can have a direct streamline now.
Ave, ave, ave. Sorry, that's a very in joke amongst the Paprec
But it's very appropriate for this moment.
Avez-vous tous accès à la question et la main pour répondre? Est-ce que c'est bon? S'il y a des questions ou
11
on est là.
11 réponses sur 14.
And Céline, I don't know if you would like to read again in French, because now we have only English version of this question. So at least mention the 3 different answers. Perfect.
Time is running.
Okay, so you can see your screen and the result over there.
Okay.
Quite interesting, Brian.
Yeah, do you want me to comment now?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, yeah. That's quite interesting, because the low score for the external agency is the most interesting, because often it's the external agency who, for good reason or bad, they usually assume that they are the right people to drive the process, because they don't trust perhaps the local structure to do it. So that's quite an interesting response. I certainly share that, and my particular answer would have been for the independent champion, which again, it's a very small sample, but had a reasonable response. But it's good that the management staff from the wetland are seen as the key drivers. They're the ones who after all, own the process, have to own the process. But perhaps for me, the lack of response to the external agency is perhaps the most interesting response to that question, which contrasts with what the real world situation is often. And I think perhaps NGOs in particular could take a lesson from that. So I'll just say that at this stage anyway.
Thank
Marco,
you, Brian.
Your microphone is off, and I see that
Yes,
also Daria.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Brian. Yes, I think now we can continue with the second question.
There is Daria, which is, oh, sorry, the hand raise up.
The script concerning.
Yeah, you just need to, somehow bring to your memory the interpretation from Brian on the answers. So you have in bold the major idea that comes as the answer. You just click on the color on the answer, which is below.
On the link we sent, huh? Not on the code link. Yeah, shared.
Yeah. Yeah. Brian, interesting answers.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm the one who clicked creativity. I think the point really here is that of these three questions, they are not mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
In that really you need all of those skills. So there isn't really in any of these questions that we ask and any of the answers, there's no right or wrong answer. And I think perhaps what this emphasizes is that in carrying out governance, it's rarely the job of one individual. You need someone obviously to drive the process, but you need people with different skills, so that you might be very good yourself at communicating, but you need to bring in someone from the outside often who's perhaps more creative. Certainly transparency is a universal value that I think every manager needs to develop. Managers should be developing an openness and an honesty towards the local community, and perhaps overcoming perhaps prejudices and preconceptions they may have. And I think the best managers' sites are those that have developed that key word, which is trust, with a local community. It won't be consistent. There will be conflict. There will be situations in which there is a breakdown of that trust, but trust is the ultimate word. And achieving that requires all of those skills. It requires good communication. It requires transparency. But creativity can add so much to the process, because it makes life so much easier, and it can bring warmth and humor to the interrelationship between stakeholders and the management.
Yeah, thank you. Let's go to the last question.
Marco, I
Yes.
want just to remind the group that they need to answer on the link we sent on the chat, not on the screen of the Zoom. Okay, so they need to pass through the link to be able to answer, because I see that some of the participants are not able to answer. So I hope it's clear. Let's go.
Yeah, maybe the problem is that there is no sign when you click, that you have voted, that you gave your voice to one of the three questions.
Yes, don't look at Zoom, but on the Kahoot link for voting.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Again, interesting, the popularity of the contract approach, or contra. I think this is very much a cultural question. I found back quite a few years ago, working with initiatives in the former Soviet states, particularly around the Baltic, when we were trying to translate a model developed elsewhere in Europe into those areas. And at that time, the response was no. We need some direction from above. We can't move without direction from above, because that's the culture they had grown up in. Now, when I go back to those areas, it's completely turned around, and there's much more local initiatives from the bottom up. Also, the contract approach very much applies to a particular constitutional structures, similar to France, the codified structures. I remember giving a presentation in France on the contrast between the way we do things in the UK, which was more somewhere between the state and the local initiative, compared to the French contract approach. And I was emphasizing the voluntary nature of collaboration. But a French colleague said that wouldn't work in France because we don't play cricket. Now, that is a very sophisticated and subtle way of saying that, you know, we in France have a much more codified approach to governance than perhaps in the Anglo-Saxon world. And so it's very much a cultural response. For me, I like the contract approach. I think it brings together that element of voluntary collaboration and enthusiasm with a formalized structure that binds people informally, so that they, after 2 years when the politician has changed, they can't just walk away without breaking the contract. So again, it's very much there's no right answer to this, and a lot of it will be culturally determined. So again, it's interesting here that the preference, on a very small sample obviously, is for that formalized contract approach. So thank you for that. That's interesting.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brian, and to all participants that have voted and provided the answers, their opinion to these questions. Yeah, I think we are coming close to to close the workshop of today. There is some conclusions maybe to make. Brian, would you have a general conclusion, some feelings from your side? What do you think?
I would like to go back to the tool again, to perhaps to simplify the tool. I think that there's probably a general agreement about that. I've been interested, I think today, particularly comment about the potential political value of the tool. That's perhaps something we didn't emphasize enough in the governance handbook, that it does have a very strong potential political role in perhaps demonstrating, particularly to higher level of governance, the importance of properly resourcing governance work. So I think that's something perhaps in terms of its delivery, the agencies in particular perhaps may want to emphasize more. So I think there are those two issues, the political value and the technical issues. And I think, like anything else, the handbook we produced, as with all governance, it isn't the definitive work. It would be very good to revisit it after a couple of years and draw on the experience of sites around the Mediterranean on how it's applied. So a plea to the agencies to perhaps revisit it on a regular basis. So those are my reflections.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brian. Completely agree. I think these are lessons from today and from all the exercises that we had in the past. Also, some reactions that some other participants that are not today with us would suggest, especially when it comes to simplification, maybe of the tool, making it available online, on the website. Definitely this political value that you mentioned is also very important today, that came out today. And yeah, definitely the handbook should be a living document, a living handbook that we need to revise, as you said, and we will have this in mind, not only for the wetlands. I think governance is an issue that is important for the coastal management in general. So when implementing some other projects, we definitely will try to adjust, the experience that we have with the handbook that was dedicated to coastal wetlands to other specific either ecosystems in coastal zones, but for coastal zones in general. So this is something that we have in front of us, and I'm sure that all these experiences, and I would like to thank all the participants today, but also from other training that we had maybe 1 year ago, and some webinars in between, that they provided rather good inputs for working on the handbook in the future. And yeah, as we are the center dealing with coastal zone management in the Mediterranean and implementing the protocol, this legal instrument, I think the governance issue is really crucial, for all of us, not only for the wetlands. So yeah, if there are some questions, or if somebody else would like to have some proposals or would have some ideas, definitely the floor is still open.
I've noted that, Marco, there is a question on the chat from Mr. Abdesadar about how can we ensure the satisfaction of all stakeholders? It's a question for Brian.
I think there's a very simple answer to that question: is keep them engaged.
Exactly.
I don't think
from the beginning.
From the beginning. Well, firstly, the first part of the process is to make sure you know who the stakeholders are. You need to, the technical term is to map them.
Yeah.
And so that you do have a list, and that list is flexible because it may change over time, but also that you're in drawing up that list is not, to use an English expression, not just the usual suspects. You perhaps need to open your mind and cast your net wide to think who are the real stakeholders. There may be groups out there, members of the public, that aren't represented by a powerful political voice. And then once you've identified them, work out the best way of engaging them and communicating with them, and keep it up. It's not just an exercise you do for a couple of months and then forget. You've got to find a way of constantly involving them in open days, in inviting representatives to your steering group meetings, in presentations in local venues, producing materials that are clear and interesting and attractive for them. So it's a constant process all the time.
Yeah, transparency, as we said earlier, building trust, and keep the, enabling the conditions for dialogue, allowing really stakeholders to be around the table, all equal, and respected.
And one final point, and it's very much something I believed in for a long time, is that we're so-called technical experts. We spent years studying. We've got degrees, master's degrees, doctorates, but often the real experts are the local users. But because of all our training and our education, we might feel a bit superior to those people. But I think we need to respect local knowledge and local wisdom, and because often they've been managing the sites for generations. They may have not got it right, but their knowledge and understanding of a site may exceed those of the so-called technical experts. But because of our exclusive privilege, we may not fully recognize it.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much. I do not see any other question in chat, nor
Is Mr. Ramzi would like to speak, and I think that there is another coming question on the chat.
Yeah.
So maybe Mr. Ramzi first, which will raise the hand a few minutes ago.
Par rapport à la question de gouvernance, par rapport à la dernière réunion qu'on a faite avec le gouverneur de la région, vous m'entendez? Qui est le
Yes, now, yeah.
Now, yes, not before.
En présence du secrétaire général, j'ai proposé la mise en place d'un comité de gouvernance et un comité de gestion. Au niveau de la décision, ils ne font pas la différence entre un comité de gouvernance qui est un comité de décision, les décisionnaires, et un comité de gestion, c'est un comité de gestionnaire, de management. Il fallait faire la différence entre les deux, il fallait expliquer quelle est la différence entre un comité de gouvernance et un comité de gestion, qui sont différents, mais qui doivent travailler ensemble. Un propose, l'autre prend la décision. Le comité de gestion propose des actions et le comité de gouvernance prend la décision, parce que la décision appartient à ce comité de gouvernance. La deuxième question qu'il m'a posée le secrétaire général, qui sera le tête de file? Le tête de file, moi j'aurais dit pour le comité de gouvernance, ça va être serait un niveau de responsabilité plus élevé. Et par rapport au comité de gestion, ce serait l'équipe locale qui connaissent le lieu, qui travaille sur le lieu, ou le gestionnaire du site. Sauf que aussi il y a une amalgame qui sera le gestionnaire du site. Par exemple, pour nous, c'est une zone côtière. Une zone côtière, nous avons 5 écosystèmes, le marin, le lacustre, le forestier, et le pôle d'eau. Nous, chez nous, chaque secteur gère spécifiquement son site. Par exemple, l'eau, c'est le ministère des Ressources en eau. Et là, pour mieux gérer, je pense qu'il faut qu'il y ait une gestion commune. On ne peut pas identifier un seul gestionnaire, sinon celui-là, il ne pourra pas travailler tout seul. Il y aura toujours des blocages, comment on appelle, il y aura un chevauchement de missions. Mais si on a expérimenté des comités de pilotage où c'est intersectoriel, à bas niveau, ça veut dire local, on a réussi à faire des actions très concrètes, réelles, ça veut dire des actions faisables et réelles. Ça, c'est un comité de pilotage local, interne, c'est le comité qui a eu plus de résultats. La deuxième question, les techniques. On a eu un problème par rapport au zoning pour l'aire protégée. Dans la loi, il y a le zoning des zones humides. On a un plan d'eau, les bassins versants et la partie inondable. Mais sur la loi aussi des aires protégées, il y a 3 zones. C'est la zone centrale, tampon et périphérique. Nous avons proposé, parce que c'est une zone humide, le centre de enfin, ça c'est l'aire protégée sur une réserve naturelle. Hein. La zone humide, c'est le centre de la réserve naturelle. Il y a eu une polémique entre nous et les gestionnaires de l'environnement sur ce problème de zone. Ça, j'aimerais bien avoir une réponse. Est-ce que pour une zone humide qui est classée en aire protégée, réserve naturelle, on applique le zoning de la zone humide ou le zoning d'une aire protégée? Je ne sais pas ce que j'ai pu m'expliquer, sinon je vais répéter. Et merci.
Brian, do you want to comment or
just on the first part of
the
question there? Yeah, there isn't one model fits every situation, but I think it's important that the body making the decisions, it must be in a situation that it can't be overruled by a wider group that doesn't have any responsibility for the resource. I don't know if you understand my point on this. I've worked in a situation, for example, where we've had a steering group which is comprised of those bodies and organizations that have a financial and a legal responsibility for the site. They are the ones who will deliver the results. They are the ones who will pay for the results and pay for the actions. But there is a wider technical group of technical experts and a wider stakeholder group. So there's 3 groups, but ultimately the one that makes the decisions must be the one that has the one that pays the money or has the legal responsibility. So, for example, if your wider stakeholder group says, yes, we insist that we have a €5 million visitor centre, then obviously they can't impose that onto the bodies that would have to pay for it. And this is where I think the value of the contract approach is that you have some sort of contractual relationship, and there are models out there from France, from Italy, from other countries that have already dealt with this issue about where the responsibilities lie. So that the steering group, who has the money and the legal power, just doesn't ignore the stakeholders, doesn't ignore the technical group. But on the other hand, there is an appropriate and agreed balance of power and responsibility between the different levels. But I think that's where the wonderful virtue of that contract approach lies. That second point, I'm not sure I fully understand the issue locally, so I don't feel I can comment on that.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Are there some more questions, or someone would like to discuss some point?
Marco, there is one more question on the chat for Brian from Emilietta. I don't know if...
It's strange because I'm not seeing these questions, but yeah. Please, Emilietta, the floor is yours. Please ask the question.
Sorry, I sent to Flavio and I didn't see that it is
sorry, it was just for me. Okay, okay.
No, I sent to you, but I didn't see that it was just sent to you.
Okay.
My question is just want an advice for the self-assessment exercise, which is, let's say, the advice from Brian. Who will be the responsible institution to complete this? Just management of wetlands, administrative, or let's say administration or something like this, or the, let's say, management committee or something like this, and how many times it's necessary to complete and to let's say improve the work or plan for this wetland area. These are my questions.
Yeah, thank you, Emilietta.
In answer to that question, I think the first part of the question, who should complete this? I think it's important there that perhaps the manager of the site is perhaps the person to drive that process, but to involve the management committee in it, to introduce it to them and say, we think it's appropriate to go through this process, but we will need your involvement.
Yes.
Because I think unless you do involve the manager, if you don't give responsibility, then I don't think it will happen. Someone needs to be identified as a person to do it.
Yeah.
So you've got to give it to someone. It might be that you've got an outside body, GWP, for example, in your area, who may feel that they're the ones to drive it. But I think that's up to you, I think, in the local area to decide who is the person to drive it. But they shouldn't do it in secret. They perhaps maybe convene a special meeting of the group to go through it. It's also designed to act as a workshop tool for people to look at themselves. So the more people you involve in it, the better. So perhaps see it as a workshop tool to involve those members of the steering groups, take them away from the day-to-day responsibility of arguing over the budget, and perhaps have an away day to fill in the document, the assessment.
Thank you.
Yeah, I forgot what the second point was now. So quickly.
The second one is
how often? No, actually,
how complete this.
I think how often is fitted into your management plan cycle, I would suggest, because your management plan usually has a 5-year cycle. So it may be good to just build that into that cycle.
not correctly, because in mainly, let's say, of management plans, that documents that we have prepared, we mentioned that it will be for 10 years. And maybe in the middle of the life of this implementation, it is just a consultation process with stakeholders to identify how it is completed and what gaps and barriers are facing during this period. And maybe it is better for the next period for the next cycle of the management plan. Yeah. So you think it is necessary maybe to do it together with this consultation?
I'm a strong believer in integrating the processes together for simplicity. It's a good chance, it's a good opportunity to review where you are.
Yes.
At the same time, but also it gives it a timetable then, simply.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Emilietta and Brian. Flavio, are there any questions? No, just for you, maybe.
I didn't realize that the message was sent to me. No, I have no question actually.
No. Then I think we can come to a conclusion of today's workshop. First of all, I'd like to thank the coastal managers for the participation and for being active in these discussions. And then I'd like to thank the colleagues from MedWet, of course, for their great assistance in providing many things to make this workshop happen. Brian, thank you very much. Really owe you a great hug from all sides for your contribution. We really like to listen to your explanation and the way how you present the issues and the documents. So thank you very much. I should not forget Christina and Selene, our interpreters. So thank you very much for this as well, and Alexander, who guided us through the poll, through the voting on the questions. Maybe I have forgotten somebody, but if I have, at the end, big thank to everybody who participated to the workshop. Thank you very much. I wish you, all the best in your activities in the wetlands, because wetlands, we all agree, are crucial ecosystems in the coastal areas, and we will definitely support the activities not only for the governance, but we have succeeded in the Mediterranean Action Plan to put the coastal wetlands in the post-2020 sub-bio. This is an important document of the Barcelona Convention, in addition, of course, to the activities that you are working under the Ramsar Convention. So thank you very much to all, and we'll keep you informed about the developments of the handbook and of the tool. Thank you very much, and have a good evening, good afternoon, today and the rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.